might have an image in Photoshop that you want to resize or rotate or just change or distort in some particular way. And you can transform those images, and you can even scale them in smart ways. So let's explore what we can do next. So here's an image of the horses. It's its own layer. And if I have that layer selected, I can come over here to Edit menu, and I can transform. There's actually free transform, Control-T, and then there's transform, which breaks it down into specific topics. So for example, scale something. And I can scale it by just resizing it from these corner handles. Now if I hold down the Shift key when I resize, it's going to constrain the proportions as I'm scaling those horses. And I can make them maybe a little smaller or a little bit larger. You have to be careful though if you make too many changes, because there's only so many adjustments that Photoshop can make based on those original pixels. Now I can go ahead and press Enter, or I can commit, and that transforms in place and just position it where I want. I'm going to do Control-T, and that's the free transform. And with Control-T, I can actually scale some more. I could rotate. And then depending on what keyboard shortcuts I use, for example, the Control key, here it is, I'm holding down the Control key, or if you hold down the Alt key, you get some different results. Now the good news is if I change something and I wasn't quite sure I wanted to have those results, I can always press Escape, or you can use the Cancel button, and it removes any of those changes, those transformations, and returns back to the last state that you had. The transform is also nice if you had something like a frame, like we have here, this frame, and I can use that to resize the frame if I wanted to, reposition it. Because this isn't a vector object, I got to use the tools that Photoshop wants me to use in order to resize that graphic. And you can also use the transform to work with text. It's a great way to resize text, and that's handy because sometimes your text has been rasterized, it doesn't even act like text, but you can not only resize it, but you could also rotate it, or even hold down the Control key and do some skewing with that information. Incidentally, if I go into the middle and I hold down the Control key, I can skew with some alignment on both sides. Press Enter, and now it's set in place. Let's take a closer look at these smart objects. Now this is a smart object, I can tell because of the little icon on the side. And I made a duplicate of it already. So here it is. The smart object means that you're not actually seeing what's there, you're seeing an embedded image. And if I were to double click on that smart object, this is the actual image. And so there's a lot more pixel information than what we have here. Let's go ahead and close that. Whoops. Let's go ahead and close that sailboat. There's a lot more pixel information than what we have here on this stage. So if I were to use my transform and resize that, I actually have quite a few pixels because it's still embedded into that smart object. Let's go ahead and undo for a moment. Actually, let's make a copy of this. There we go. We're going to undo first, go backwards, and then we're going to make a copy of it by dragging it down. And so I've got 3 boats in here. And with one of the boats, I'm going to go ahead and just change it so it's no longer a smart object. Go to Layer menu, Smart Objects, and Rasterize. And you can see how the layer changed, and this has been converted into its own object. When I try to transform this with the free transform, make it a lot bigger, it already looks a little bit dangerous, doesn't it? Press Enter, and it just looks grainy, and that's because I just didn't have enough pixel information for Photoshop to render the information to really interpret what's going well. Whereas if I have my other smart object, which is still embedded, and I go ahead and free transform that, even if it's bigger or smaller, about the same size, you can really see the difference. The horses did okay when I kept transforming them because there was enough pixel information embedded into that material that Photoshop was able to render it. But keep that in mind when you transform, is it can be destructive in the long run. Okay. We're going to use a transform effect to create a shadow for these horses. And we're going to start by creating a new document, or a new layer rather. Scroll this down. We'll place it right below where the horses live. And I'm going to go ahead and control click on the mask. That gives me the selection that looks like those horses, making sure I still have this. And I want to change that selection so that it's a lot softer and smoother, the way a shadow would be. So I'm going to go ahead and select Refine Edge and really smooth out, because I don't need all the detail of the hair. And maybe even put some feather on there, so that might be a little too much, but just make it look as if this were going to be a shadow effect. Click on OK. Give it a moment to process that information, and now we've got our shape that we want to use and convert into a shadow. Go ahead and just edit Fill with black. And we'll go ahead and deselect. It's kind of a dark shadow, but we can change the opacity down something in the 40s or so. Depends on the image, and not obviously. And if I start putting those horses back on, we'll see what happens when we transform it. So I'll do my Control T to free transform. And we're going to use that control and the corner handle to skew it. And you can see that as we're skewing it, it's creating this interesting shape. And I'm going to use this shadow, this real one here for the palm tree, to kind of give me a guideline about the angle so that the lighting is consistent. And I'm just going to start control and dragging these different corner handles until I have something that I like. And I can even resize it, make it smaller, etc. Press Enter, and then maybe move it a little bit. And I can always go back if I wanted to change some of the positions of where the hooves are meeting it. And there we got ourselves a shadow effect that we can then use for those horses and link them together. Now, in addition to the transform, you have the content aware scale. I want to explore what that option lets us do. Let's go in here to this boat. And I'm going to start by just changing this background into a regular layer. And if I do a regular transform and I start resizing it, notice how all the pixels are being squished together, and you can really see what's going on with that boat. Okay. Similarly, I'll try this again with this image right here. Click on OK, and I'll start resizing. You can see what's happening with that post. Okay. What the content aware scale does is it analyzes the pixels in your document, and it realizes some of the pixels are more important than the other. Now you first need to make a selection. So you do your selection in here, and then you go to your Edit menu and you choose Content Aware Scale. And now as you're sizing it, notice that that foreground, that boat, is preserving some of its width, its proportions, and what's being shrunk is the background information. And the more obvious that background is to Photoshop, the easier it's going to do. So it has to do with some contrast and some monotony in the background. And that really helps when you're trying to use this content aware. So let's do a Control A to select everything. And we'll go back here to Edit menu, Content Aware Scale. And we'll see what happens. And you can see how that post isn't getting a lot skinnier. It's just getting a little bit skinnier. Whereas the background is what's really changing, and it's adding some interesting perspective. Well, now it's time for a pop quiz. What is the keyboard shortcut for free transform? A, Control D, B, Control F, C, Control K, D, Control T. The answer is D, Control T. We'll have fun with these different transform features with the free transform and the regular transform options, and also the content aware scale.